Okay. All right. So, good morning, and I would like to welcome you to the show. Of course, we are speaking with U.S. Senator Kamala Harris. She is the Democratic nominee for Vice President of the United States. Senator Harris, it's good to see you again. How are you?
It's good to see you again, Mr. Jones. Thank you. It's good to be
You're
with
so
you.
welcome. You're welcome. So, last time you were on my block, now you're in my house. Welcome to my humble home. Uh, and
It's good
so,
to be you. I'm actually in our studio in my alma mater. We set up our campaign office at Howard University.
that's
So
interesting.
I send you greetings from DC from Howard.
Absolutely. Go Bison. So, um,
Yes.
I want to talk about the issue that is affecting our community the most. I think everything else kind of springs from that is racism. It's real in a way that we have not seen it during my lifetime. It's open in a way we haven't seen it during my lifetime
Yeah.
in lending, in housing, in employment, in education. Um, how do you and Joe Biden plan to handle the issue of racism in our country?
So let me start by saying it is an honor to be with you again and to speak with you. I would beg to differ in terms of this. It is perhaps more evident,
Yeah.
but it is the racism that we have been experiencing. It remains, constant in terms of the effects of racism, right? I think so much about this pandemic. It has been an accelerator, meaning folks who are doing badly before are doing worse now. When we look at the racial disparities that have been highlighted during the course of the pandemic, be it public health, be it economic, be it education, um, you see the disparities based on race highlighted, but they existed before. And how do we plan on dealing with it? Well, first, we have to speak truth about the fact of racism. We have to speak truth about the fact of systemic racism. Joe Biden is the only candidate for president who is speaking that truth. Donald Trump rejects that truth. Joe Biden, on the issue of the importance of understanding Black life, is the only person who is running for president who has said Black Lives Matter. Donald Trump refuses to speak that word, that term. And so, one, it's about one, acknowledging America's history on this issue and the fact of it, and then addressing it. And that's about solutions. So, for example, knowing that Black folks are 3 times more likely to contract the coronavirus, twice as likely to die from it, that we have 20% more likely to get asthma, 40% more likely to have high blood pressure, Black women 3 times more likely to have lupus than other women. We need to address these issues, both in terms of the long-standing disparities, but also having a plan to deal with the virus. Joe Biden and I have a plan that's about a national plan for testing, for treatment, and for the vaccine, when, God willing, we get a safe vaccine. And doing it, taking into account racial disparities. In fact, in the Senate, I have an act, the Racial Disparities Task Force Act, that will put in place, and we will do this when we win, God willing, to put in place community leaders, public health leaders, to deal with the racial disparities around treatment, access to treatment, and help, so that when we deal with this virus going forward, we take those disparities into account. Let's deal with something that the folks in Philly are dealing with every day, which is the economic impact of the virus. I visited with small businesses in Philadelphia. Philadelphia historically has a thriving community of small business owners and leaders that have been so badly impacted by this virus. Part of our plan is to put $150 billion into low interest loans and access to capital, with a particular emphasis on minority business owners and Black business owners, understanding that it is access to capital and sustained access to capital that allows the entrepreneurs in our community, the people who have a vision, who have a skill, who have a talent that would allow them to start a business if only they had access to capital, that they just need that kind of focus. Joe Biden and I have a plan not only to create access to capital, but to make sure that we're also doing that through our community banks. When you look at how Black businesses were hurt during this pandemic, up to 90% of our minority-owned businesses did not receive the benefit of the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and in large part because our businesses don't have access to the big bankers. We bank at the community bank, and we need to make sure that our community lending institutions have the support that they need. Education. Our plan is $70 billion going to HBCUs, right? Why? Well, you know, I say this as a proud graduate of an HBCU, but our HBCUs disproportionately are the pipeline to us entering all the professions and being leaders that are national leaders and international leaders. And so the $70 billion is to go and support our HBCUs around a number of things, including our HBCUs that have teaching hospitals, that do research, that do scientific research, medical research, because we want to make sure that we have folks who are being trained to do the research and interpret the research in a culturally competent way. So these are some of the examples. And then, of course, what we need to do around the criminal justice system. And that's about a plan that's about banning chokeholds. George Floyd would be alive today. To requiring that there be a national registry of police officers who break the law and break the rules, having a national standard for use of force. So instead of asking the question, was the use of force reasonable, knowing you can reason away just about anything, we will say that the question, the fair and just question needs to be, was that use of force necessary? We will decriminalize marijuana and expunge the records of people who have been convicted for marijuana offenses, and also shut down the private prison industry, which is profiting off of the incarceration of human beings.
Well, let me ask you this question, because when you came here, it was an interesting scene. I mean, a couple of things happened. One of the things that kind of jumped out at me is I saw you coming down Ogons Avenue toward this restaurant called Relish. There was a man in the doorway. He had a little boy with him. And the man was talking about how angry he was and how he wasn't going to vote. And he wanted, frankly, to confront you. He felt like it was your fault because you were a prosecutor. And when you did stop to speak with him, he said, look, you know, too many Black people in prison. That's not right. And you said, that's going to change. My question is how? How is that going to change?
Yeah. And, you know, I wish that I had more time with the brother because, you know, he was there. I think that was his son.
Yeah.
Right? And he knows the life experience he has had as a man. And there's not a Black man I know, be he a relative or a friend, who has not experienced some form of racial profiling or excessive force or unreasonable stop. Not one. And he's raising a Black child to be a Black man. So his level of concern and righteous anger with a system that has been fueled and in many cases enforced by racial bias and institutional and systemic racism was real, and I respect that. In fact, look, I decided to become a prosecutor because I grew up in a community that had the same experiences, and I said, well, look, we need to change it, and I'm going to go on the inside and try and change it from there, in addition to all of the work that's happening on the outside. How do we deal with it? You know, he was right. We need to have a system that understands that we cannot continue with this mass incarceration in America. We incarcerate more human beings per capita than any country in the world. And so that's why, for example, part of our policy is that people will not be incarcerated, not go to jail for drug use offenses. You know how many people are sitting in jail for that? Where we have criminalized what is a public health issue. And Joe and I feel very strongly about that. What are we going to do? Again, it's about saying that there needs to be accountability and consequence for the system and the people who act within the system. And that's about what we will do in terms of law enforcement who break the rules and break the laws. It's also about what we need to do to invest in communities. And here's what I'm talking about, Solomon. So you can go to any upper middle class neighborhood in America, and you will not see the kind of police presence that you see in other neighborhoods. But what you will see well-funded public schools. You will see high rates of home ownership. You will see people who can afford access to health care, including mental health care. You will see families that have an income that allows them to get through the end of the month without worrying about if they can feed their children. You will see small businesses with access to capital. So what Joe and I are also saying is, in addition to reforming the criminal justice system, in addition to police reform, we need to invest in healthy communities, which is why we have that folks will get a $15,000 tax credit for first-time home ownership in Philadelphia, around the country, with redlining and so many other policies that have prevented Black folks from buying homes. What we know is that folks need just a bit of help to be able to get that down payment and closing costs to own a home, which for all Americans is their greatest source of wealth and income and intergenerational wealth. So $15,000 tax credit for that. We're saying for any of our students who are coming from a family that makes less than $125,000, they go free, tuition free, to a 4-year public school and a 4-year private HBCU. We're saying for any of our students that come out of college and they take a job that's about public service and they make less than $125,000, that their tuition, that their student loan debt will be forgiven. These are some of the examples of concrete things that need to happen. Mm-hmm. We're going to triple Title I funding. Title I funding is the money, the federal money that goes to public schools in underserved communities. And we know we are not putting the kind of resources that we need to put in our public schools, and which means that our children, in spite of their capacity and their beautiful brains, are not getting the kind of resources they need to reach their capacity. These are some of the things that we're talking about doing and that we intend to do.
Senator, one of the things that's really affecting our community now, of course, is police violence, the criminal justice system. You've been a part of that system, and there have been some questions about your record as a DA and Attorney General in California. You know, people have said that you've opposed some things like police cameras on the uniforms and some.
No, wait. Let's clear this stuff up. I'm glad you're raising it.
Clear it up.
I appreciate this. I was the first statewide officer to require that statewide law enforcement wear body cameras and keep them on full time when I was Attorney General of California. Say what?
Did you oppose them at any time? Did you oppose?
Did I oppose body cameras?
Yeah.
No, I've not opposed body cameras. I instituted a plan for body cameras. Okay. I created the first back in 2000. Now remember, I was elected DA in 2003.
Yes.
Years before Black Lives Matter. Years before we had the kind of brilliance of what Black Lives Matter has done to put pressure on the system from the outside, to yield from what on the inside is a status quo that does not want to change. Yeah. I created, back in the early 2000s, one of the first in the nation programs, and I designed it focused on predominantly young men who had been arrested for drug sales. And getting them jobs and counseling and then dismissing the charges against them. And you know what, Mr. Jones, when I created that program, people said, she's created a hug a thug program. That's how people would talk. They said, what are you doing? You're the DA. You're supposed to be locking people up, not letting them out. But I persevered. The program was a success, so much so that later when Barack Obama and Eric Holder were running the Justice Department, they named my program a model of innovation for law enforcement in the United States. And in addition, look, I also, yes, I prosecuted child molesters. That was one of my areas of focus, was child sexual assault. Yes, I prosecuted rapists. Yes, I prosecuted transnational criminal organizations. Yes, I prosecuted homicides. Yes, I did. And I'm gonna tell you another thing. And you can speak with folks like Dorothy Johnson-Spite at Mothers in Charge or Shantae Love, and they will tell you about the mothers of homicide victims in California that I worked with over almost 20 years to make sure that their loved ones and that they, as mothers, receive dignity in the system, because those mothers would come to my office. They would go to the front window and they'd say, I want to speak to Kamala. I only want to speak to Kamala. People I hadn't met before.
Mhm.
And they'd come into my office. I'd bring them into my office and they would sit down and cry and say, why isn't anyone taking my grief seriously? Why isn't anyone giving justice to me and my son? Why are they treating my son like a statistic instead of understanding his life had value? So that's the work that I did as a prosecutor. And I know the system from the inside. I have spent my life's career trying to reform it.
Mm.
And getting into the White House with Joe Biden, knowing what I know,
Yeah.
I do believe this is going to be one of the first chances we've had in a long time at a very top level in our government to actually reform this system.
I got to ask this question before you go, and I know you got to get ready to go, but it's important, because if you don't win Pennsylvania, quite frankly, you're probably not going to win the White House. And so the Black community in Philadelphia is going to be important for that.
Yeah.
We have a 25% poverty rate in our community. We have more shootings than we've had in years. We have unemployment in our community is very high compared to everybody else. And there's a lot of cynicism in the Black community. What in terms of our specific community here, whose vote you need, what can you say to our community about what a Biden-Harris ticket would do for this community and those issues that we're dealing with?
Well, let's start with this. I'm not about to tell anybody that they're supposed to vote for us. We need to earn those votes.
Yeah.
And to your point, have a plan that is about seeing people, understanding where they are, and understanding what they deserve from their government. Not just what they need, but what they deserve. So that's why we've had a conversation. I've talked to you about access to capital,
Yes.
right? About having a system in place so that Black families can actually grow their economic strength and well-being. It's about our public schools and funding our public schools, where so many of our children have a right to be educated with the resources that any other child has. It's about helping people with home ownership, which is one of the great sources of intergenerational wealth and one of the main ways that Black families in America have ever achieved economic advancement. It's about what we need to do, as we have talked about, in terms of reform of the criminal justice system. And I could go on and on. Mental health, we haven't even begun to talk about that. Look, poverty is trauma-inducing. And we have failed in terms of the healthcare system of America to understand that healthcare doesn't mean just treating the body from the neck down. It's also about the neck up and dealing with undiagnosed and untreated trauma. Not to mention that Donald Trump is in court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act that Barack Obama and Joe Biden put in effect, that brought healthcare to over 20 million people who didn't have it, including a lot of Black folks, including the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, giving people coverage who have pre-existing conditions. See, the earlier part of our conversation, we have some of the highest rates of pre-existing conditions: diabetes, high blood pressure, COVID.
Mhm.
For the people who live, lung scarring, things of that nature, that's a pre-existing condition, I promise you, as people try to get future health coverage. Donald Trump's trying to get rid of that right now in the middle of a public health pandemic. So these are the things that this is why I was in North Philly. This is why I'm talking with you, because the people deserve to have anybody who's running for office speak directly, to listen, and that's why I was in the neighborhood, to listen, and then to be focused on the needs that people rightly deserve to have met. And that's what I intend to do. You're right, everybody's vote, and in particular in Philly, it's so important. And I guess my last point would be, you know, I've been traveling the country. I was in North Carolina yesterday, but you can go all over the country. There are so many efforts that are being made to suppress the Black vote in our country. And you got to ask why. Why are so many powerful people trying to prevent Black people from voting? And the answer is because they know our power when we vote. When we vote, things change. When we vote, things get better. And so I would plea and I would ask all of our friends in Philadelphia to not let anyone take your power by taking your vote, by making it sound confusing about the election system, all of that. And people have to vote early. And then my last point on voting is this. So the way that it works is that voting starts today in Philadelphia. And there are 7 sites in Philadelphia that will allow people to go and drop off their ballots early. I would encourage everybody to do that. Go to iwillvote.com. But here's the thing, because Mr. Jones, people are trying to confuse, in particular, Black voters around what the process is. And so in Pennsylvania, and so in Philly, there's going to be 2 envelopes. And there's the one that's called the secrecy envelope, where you put your ballot in, and then you have to put it in the larger envelope and sign it. So please make sure you do that, because you don't want your voice to not be heard. You don't want your ballot to be rejected. So they're trying to make it difficult. They're trying to make it confusing. We know that's what they're trying to do, but we know how to educate ourselves. We know how to arm ourselves with the information to make sure that we're heard.
Right. U.S. Senator Kamala Harris, she is the Democratic nominee for Vice President of the United States. I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Okay, it's good to be with you.
All right, take care.
Okay, you too.